think we're ready. How's it going? This is the second part of the Charles Darwin lesson. We are going to talk a little bit about evolution. We'll talk more about that towards the end of the year. We'll just, talk about it very briefly, not a lot. And then we'll also talk about some sea creatures. What's a mollusk? What's a crustacean? And a few other things here and there. So let's start off with the first slide that I have for you. It's a picture of an old man. And that old man is Charles Darwin. And it's hard to talk too much about science or certainly something else called evolution without mentioning this man's name. I have a little information for you about this guy. He was born in 1809. So, a little over 200 years ago. We're actually going to talk about what we call a celebration of 200 years in just a little bit. But Charles Darwin, born in 1809, was a scientist who studied animals and plants. He came up with the idea that animals change over a very long time, which he called evolution. Now, evolution is going to take us probably a few weeks to talk about, but I just want to introduce that here in just a little bit. Okay. I also have something else about Charles Darwin. I will make that bigger so you can read it. Charles Darwin was a smart scientist from England. He had a big idea about how animals and plants change slowly over a very long time. So when we talk about very long time, we're talking about thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, sometimes millions of years. So you will not see this in your lifetime. This takes a very long time for animals and plants to do something called adapt. So they change to try to become better at not being eaten or better at hiding from predators, things like that. Make it a little bigger here again. He wrote a famous book called On the Origin of Species in 1859 that talked about this idea. His idea helped us understand how life on Earth has changed over a really, really long time. Remember, millions of years, sometimes millions of years, this thing called evolution. But he was born in 1809, and since we are living in the year 2023, it wasn't that long ago that the bicentennial of his birth was celebrated. You might be wondering, what bicentennial? What are you talking about? Well, B-I at the beginning there, that means 2, and cent, that means 100. So if you look at that picture, there is a 200 there with birthday candles. So a bicentennial celebration is when you celebrate something that happened 200 years ago. The bicentennial celebration of our country's independence was a big party that happened back in 1776. So the nation, the United States, was born in 1776. So that should say 1976, I think. So in 1976, the U.S. celebrated its 200th birthday. And if you look at that quarter right there, I'll make it a little bigger. It probably says something about the 200th anniversary. So a bicentennial is the 200th anniversary of something. I was born in 1975, so I don't remember the country's 200th birthday, but I hear it happened in 1976 because the United States became a country in 1776. Darwin was born in 1809, so in 2009, probably before many of you were born. No, I think maybe you were like 1 or 2. The bicentennial of Darwin's birthday was celebrated. Hopefully that helps. Now let's talk about the Galapagos Islands. A lot of times when you hear Charles Darwin, you will also hear of this place called the Galapagos Islands. Check down there. The Galapagos Islands are famous because they helped Charles Darwin, a scientist, come up with the idea of evolution. So when he traveled there, he found many plants and animals that didn't exist anywhere else. And he was a scientist that studied plants and animals. So the plants and animals there are unique. You can't find them anywhere else in the world. And they showed how species change over time. So species are like the types of animals and plants, species in English. And this place was unique. There weren't any other plants or animals there that could be found in other places. Let's talk about where the Galapagos Islands can be found. So we have a map of South America right there. Maybe you can see Brazil. It's a big country there. It's not labeled. But on the west coast of South America is a country called Ecuador. And the Galapagos Islands belong to Ecuador. Check out the sentences at the bottom. The Galapagos Islands are in the Pacific Ocean, not far from South America. They belong to the country of Ecuador. So if you remember from the last lesson, Charles Darwin sailed to the Galapagos Islands back in the early 1800s, and he sailed on that ship called the Beagle. We talked about last class how a beagle is a type of dog. I had a picture there for you. All right, evolution. So to be honest, some religions have trouble with this. A lot of scientists believe this theory is true. So luckily, we do not have to talk too much about it today. I just want you to know that it exists. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is the idea that animals and plants change slowly over a very long time to become better suited to their environment. So for example, we talked about this in class. If humans live in areas where there are a lot of mountains and they live high up in those mountains over a long period of time, thousands, tens of thousands of years, those humans will have larger lungs. We've talked about lungs in class before. They help you breathe. Lungs. It's like different from lumps. Remember when we talked about that? Lungs, lumps, a couple other words. So that's how, over a long period of time, a species can change. You won't see it in your lifetime. It takes way too much time, but that's what that theory of evolution is. Remember, it's a theory. It can't be proven, but there is a lot of evidence to suggest that it's true. The next one here, big word, entomology. Remember, in English, anytime a word ends with ology, it means it's the study of something. So it's probably some kind of science. Entomology, if you look, I'll make the picture bigger. Quite a lot of different animals there. Looks like you have some butterflies, you get maybe some beetles of some sort, maybe a grasshopper here and there. But entomology is the study of bugs like insects and spiders, to learn about their behavior, where they live, and how to identify them. So if somebody is an entomologist, they basically study bugs. And guess what? Charles Darwin was an entomologist. He studied all kinds of animals, but he focused on insects, bugs. We next need to talk about skeleton, because then we'll talk about something called an exoskeleton. Okay. So in English, a skeleton is basically our bones. And if you look at that picture, there are two of them. I don't know. One looks like, maybe a dinosaur, maybe some kind of water animal. We might call it an aquatic animal. And definitely the smaller one. I mean, it has two arms and it has a skull. Man, that's a person for sure. So a skeleton is the framework inside our body or an animal's body that gives it shape and supports it. It's like our body's internal structure. When you see internal, think inside. It's like our body's internal structure made of bones. So humans have skeletons. Our bones are on the inside of our body. But there are some creatures, which we will talk about in a minute, that have something called an exoskeleton. It's basically like their bones are on the outside of their body. When you hear exo, you might want to think outside a lot of times. An exoskeleton is like a hard outer armor that some animals have. I think there's a typo in there. That some animals have, like insects and crabs, have on the outside of their bodies to protect them and keep their shape. Like their skin on the outside. So that's going to bug me if I don't switch it. So have. Right? Well, some animals have. Okay, I will fix this here. It's been a long day. Long day teaching. I thought my voice would give out. I didn't think I would have a voice, but it looks like I do. Reading gets to be tough at this point of the day, seeing I have been awake for, 12 hours, something like that. Ooh, almost 12 hours. Yeah. So long day of teaching. And look at, there's still a typo in there. I forgot the have. Some animals have. Okay. I've used too many characters. I can only have 200 letters there, so that typo is going to be there. Sorry. Let's move on. Hopefully you know what an exoskeleton is. Crustaceans. These are animals that live in the ocean. Guess what? They have exoskeletons. Darwin studied crustaceans. So I wanted you to know for this biology class what crustaceans are. A crustacean is a type of sea creature, so it lives in the sea, with an exoskeleton. We'll talk about some crustaceans in a minute, like crabs and lobsters. They live in the ocean, and many of them have claws or legs that they use for catching food and moving around. So that's a very simple definition of what crustaceans are. You might see that they have claws. Well, let's look at the next one, because we will talk about claws here. A crab. Right there. A crab. It almost looks like a spider in the sea with claws. So those two things that you definitely don't want to put your finger in are sometimes called claws. A crab is a sea animal with a hard shell and big pincers or claws. It walks sideways and lives in the ocean or near the beach. And guess what? Yesterday, my wife and I, we went to the beach, and guess what? She found a couple crabs. So if you watch the English lesson that I will have at a beach out in a couple weeks, you'll see some crabs, some different kind of crabs that we call hermit crabs. All right, the next one. Maine is very famous for this creature. This creature is called a lobster. A lobster is a big ocean creature with a hard shell long antennae. The antennae are the two like long things that you can see coming out of its head. In English, we call them antennas or antennae. Also, lobster has a big claw. People like to eat them. I'm not a huge lobster fan. I have to be in the right mood to eat lobster. And since they're so expensive, I usually don't get lobster. But people like to eat them, especially at fancy dinners, because they are pretty expensive. Even though here in Maine, we have access to lobsters, they're still pretty expensive. Shrimp. Usually when you hear the word shrimp, think of something small. Okay. It's probably not very nice, but someone who is short, we could probably call them a shrimp. They would probably be upset with you if you did. It's not very nice, but a shrimp is a small sea animal that looks like a tiny lobster, sort of. People often eat them, and they come in different sizes and colors. So actually, the last three animals that you saw there, they look to me like they've already been cooked, because lobsters living in the ocean, crabs living in the ocean aren't usually that red, but after they get cooked, they do become red. Usually they're like more brown. And this shrimp right here, one shrimp, two shrimp. You don't put an S on shrimp for some reason. But that shrimp looks like it's also been cooked. And definitely the ones in the corner, down there, those have definitely been cooked. And you might even hear jumbo shrimp. So it's like really big shrimp. And you can have popcorn shrimp. Those are really small. You'll find those in restaurants. They don't call them popcorn shrimp in the ocean, just at restaurants. The next one, this is another type of animal. This is a mollusk, just like we talked about crustaceans. Mollusk is a soft animal. So these things don't have exoskeletons. They're not very hard. They're pretty squishy. A mollusk is a soft animal with a squishy body. You could squish it. Sometimes a hard shell. So we'll talk about that snail right there, over there, kind of the green creature. It carries a shell with it to protect its body. Like snails and clams, they live in the ocean and some even in gardens. So sometimes you'll find mollusks in the sea. Sometimes you will find them on land. This animal, though, is always found in the ocean. A clam. A clam is a sea creature with a hard shell that opens and closes like a book. Inside, it has soft parts, and people eat the inside part, which is tasty. Some people think it's tasty. I'm also not a clam guy. I have to be in the right mood to eat clams. They're pretty squishy and a little slimy. And some people don't like that feeling when they're trying to eat them. So not everybody thinks they're tasty. What about this next one? Oysters. Sometimes you'll hear the term oysters on the half shell. And that's what that picture is. It's only one shell there. So some people eat these raw, meaning uncooked. Again, I don't think I've ever had an oyster, and I've never eaten it raw on the half shell. An oyster is a sea creature with a rough shell. People like to eat them, especially as a fancy seafood dish. In that way, it's like a meal. Fancy seafood meal. Last one. Best one, though, one of my favorite animals, another mollusk. Right there, we have an octopus. An octopus. One octopus, two octopi. Yeah, it's like almost right from the Latin. So one octopus, two octopi. Or if you want, you can say octopuses. Both are correct for the plural. One octopus, it's always one octopus, but two octopi or two octopuses. Both are correct. What is an octopus? Well, it's a smart sea animal. This is why these are one of my favorite creatures. Like, they have personalities. You can have some octopi that are mean. You can have some that are nice. But they do have a soft body, which makes them a mollusk. And they have 8 long arms. We'll come up with another name for those arms in a minute. It uses its arms to catch food and can change colors. Yeah, they can camouflage. They can blend in with their surroundings. They can kind of disappear, change color, to hide from other creatures. All right. But what about those 8 long things? You might also hear them called tentacles. Tentacles. A tentacle is like a long, flexible arm or leg that some sea animals have, like octopuses, used to touch things, catch food, or move around in the water. All right. That's it. We have no more. And I'm probably going to be going to bed pretty soon.